Okay, so welcome everybody. Hopefully everybody's having a good day, enjoying the nice weather out there. So this is Creation Worldview, Session 3, the flood, fossils, and dinosaurs. And so key verses, hopefully you guys did your reading. I'm sure everybody did, right? So key verses are Genesis 6-9, Luke 19:37-40, and Job 40-41. We're going to basically be going through that, and we've got a lot to cover, actually. For those who, most of you guys are familiar with me, but for those who aren't, my name is Jeremy Palko. Most of you guys know me as Jay, and I've been serving on the Connect ministry team for a little while now, and attending Harvest for about 2.5 years. So, if you want to know more, come talk to me after. So as far as where we were at and where we're going, so Creation Worldview, again, this is just repeating this every session. Boldly defend your faith from the beginning to a lost world, because there is a lot of lostness, if that's a word, out there. Session 1, we covered from the creation account to the fall. And then session 2, we did law and theory, evidence and bias. Now we're at session 3, the flood, fossils, and dinosaurs. So I think some people like this, and I got some show and tell here. And can talk about that more as we go. But I think this is particularly fascinating. It is really like people don't give the Bible credit sometimes. We're like, okay, there's laws, there's instruction, there's commands, there's good consequences, there's bad consequences, right? But there's a lot of fascinating information in the Bible, and it's something I think we need to understand much better than we do now collectively as a church, Big C. So session 4 will be how to engage and stand firm, and that's going to be more about how to actually go out and do it. Jay's top 7 ways that I go about actually kind of communicating it myself. And so that'll be something that, you come up with your own things that click in your mind when you're talking to people, and they come up with worldviews and arguments of their own beliefs, and how you can actually maybe present it yourself. And then to repeat the objective again. So again, we mentioned last week, and that it's good to repeat things, right? And read them once, read them twice, 3 times, Genesis 1-3. I would recommend reading that multiple times, looking in the notes, understanding what's in there and why. Such as we talked about Yom, that it's the Hebrew word for day. It's 24 hours, 6 literal days of creation. The 7th day God rested. I mean, people are like, yeah, okay, that's great. But the fact of the matter is that a lot of Christians don't buy into that. They reject it, or they don't understand it, or they just want to get along with their friends. Whatever the case may be, they don't get it. And they need to get it. We all need to get it. So the objective here is to be stronger and bolder Christians who rightly divide the truth, to not be corrupted by the foolishness that is so prevalent in our world, by gaining the knowledge, wisdom, and discernment needed to not only defend our faith, but to attack the lies that undermine the spiritual growth of our children, family, and friends, right? So this affects us here now. It affects future generations. And we are where we are now because I would say there's a few decades of moral slide into the gutter. And that goes back, right? We talked about Origin of the Species, Charles Darwin, what happened back in 1859. And now 100 plus, many years later, where we're at. And I believe that has completely, in a big way, it's not the only reason, of course, but in a large, significant way, undermined Christians in their faith. So here we go, session 3. But also some follow-up. I think we already covered this, the 24-hour days, and it's just easy to remember, right? The 6th commandment, it's mentioned there, also in the 6th commandment to show those are 6 days that God created the world. And it's mentioned in Genesis, it's mentioned elsewhere in the Bible. And then worldviews, debating, and God we trust, all others bring data. I think it's okay to say that. I'll say that sometimes. People come with their opinions, and opinions can vary. You can come up with opinions on the spot. Opinions are easy, but bring me data, bring me facts, bring me evidence. Let's talk about something real and not go on this, crazy circle and death spiral into nowhere. So again, worldviews, though, they are theories. We can't really replicate these in the lab, so to speak. There are certain things that we've observed that we can replicate, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But we have a confident assertion, I believe, as creationists, as Christians, that the scientific discovery thus far, by far, aligns with biblical creation account and all of Scripture. So And just to note here, because the data is troubling, theistic evolution is malarkey. Putting it nicely. God did not use the carnage of time and chance, mutated freaks, to produce his very good creation. Right? These are mutually exclusive ideas. Anything in between, right? Between evolution, gradualism, whatever you want to call it, and creationism, that God spoke the universe and everything into creation. Trying to ride that fence it's a fallacy. It's not even intellectually honest, really, as far as I'm concerned. There are two sides to the story. There's the God scenario and there's the no God scenario. So, God, his creation, and the gospel are exclusive. Psalm 96:5 says, "For all the gods of the peoples are worthless idols, but the Lord made the heavens." So, when somebody says, many ways to heaven, I mean, clearly, the Bible is so excruciatingly clear on this. I don't know how somebody can think otherwise. That it says that for all the gods of the peoples are worthless idols, but the Lord made the heavens. So he's actually going back again to creation. That theme resonates, right, from cover to cover, from Genesis to Revelation. So, has anybody had, over the past two sessions, any reflections or introspections on theories, laws, scripture, with respect to science and worldviews? If anybody has anything, go ahead and share it, one or two. If not, it's all right. I think Karen's got a mic. If anybody has anything that maybe has come to mind, in terms of what you saw in the creation account, what you think about theories, laws, and what you think about the scientific process, how maybe it's changed your, thought patterns. Maybe it's giving you more conviction about what you believe, because sometimes if we're real with ourselves, sometimes we wonder, am I really believing the truth, right? Because we are told that we're believing a lie, right? You're giving a little pat on the head and say, "That's okay, Christian, back to your corner." But it's very condescending. So I think internally, maybe we don't have to say it here right now if you don't want to get on the mic, but the truth is, I think a lot of us struggle internally at times as you're growing up. I did, with what you're believing, how you're believing it. Why do you believe what you believe? Why is my science teacher telling me that? Why do I attend a university and they're supposed to be scientific? I'm in the, but they're not really showing me both sides of the story, and so there's an extreme, as far as I'm concerned, disservice done, to people in their so-called higher learning, which a lot of times is lower learning. So I'll go into, as we've done before, we go into some definitions, get the words down. In terms of flood, right? So flood, it's a noun, an overflowing of a large amount of water beyond its normal confines, especially over what is normally dry land. So we see floods today. Floods occur. They still occur. More to come on that. Verb, cover or submerge a place or area with water. Submerge. It's a key word. It's going to come up when we start reading the scripture and what the flood actually was. Fossils, it's a remains or impression of a prehistoric organism preserved in petrified form or as a mold or cast in rock, aka petrified remains, or American Geological Institute definition summarized as organic material preserved in the Earth's crust, right? So there's actually dead things buried, and they've been mineralized. So the process, it's permanent mineralization, which is the filling of spaces or the replacement of material respectfully in a variety of ways in water and soil. So, little fact, did you know that Darwin, I think we talked about this though, so you've already been hinted, said that the evidence for his theory would be found by digging up the remains of transitional species, right? It should be littered with transitional species, animals, halfways, partways, kind of types of fossils. So after all, the ground should be littered with these things and demonstrate a gradual increase in order and function. So, but I would say, sorry, Charles, epic fail on that one. That is not what has been found. And so this came to mind, had to add it. So as Mom would say regarding such situations, that is a lie from the pit of hell. And she's right, and Dad would nod along, I'm sure. So either the Bible is truth or it's not. There is no allowance, zero, for creative license, convenient revisions, or cherry picking. Either the Bible is God's inerrant word, and we take it as it's written. Yes, there's context, but by default, literal interpretation. Either that is what it is or it isn't. And we need to stop muddying the waters, and just kind of doing this whitewashing because we want people to come through the doors. That's not actually what we're commanded to do at all. So, on to dinosaurs. You see I got a dinosaur here? You can come up and pet him after. So, dinosaur or dinosauria. Creationists, we accept the word origin from Sir Richard Owen in 1842 as terrible lizard. That's what it actually means. So, when you hear it, though, out in mainstream media, shall we say, you hear a lot of times like, oh, that's prehistoric. That means millions of years. That all these sort of, sort of like ripple effect of when you hear the word and what you're expected to think. But we have to like battle against that and take those thoughts captive. So just a few things to note. But as an evolutionist, a fossil reptile of the Mesozoic era, often reaching enormous size. So that's what evolutionists might say, right? They're going to go back to something that has to do with the geologic column, how these dead things were buried, and so on and so forth. And that's how they're going to try and date them. So what do you say? These are primarily rhetorical. How do humans, flooding, fossilizing, and dinosaurs relate to each other? So are these periodized and separate or simultaneous and together, right? Was it gradual and just slowly over time? Or was it, wham, this is happening right now? And as Christians, we should be thinking of the latter. What does the Bible, did I wake somebody up? Okay. What does the Bible say caused the flood and the aftermath? What happens if the great flood is accepted as fact? I mean, when you Google search this, when you Google search, it leads you into saying, that it's illogical, it's a fallacy, it's a story, it's hilarious. Even when I was doing spell checks, I'm like, this is hilarious. Like it's there even in the most like sort of like mundane activities. They're even still trying to mess with your head. So I found this to be quite interesting. But Noah's Ark, and this is so this right here, if anybody's been to the Ark Encounter, all right. So this is just a little laser etching of it. You can come up and look at it after. It's pretty cool. But it's awesome. And I think it's the most amazing ship build of all time, right? So they had a lot of technology now, right? We've got all manner of things to build ships with in terms of machinery and technology and such. But back in the day, you had Noah. I'm sure he employed people in the area. But just to lay out a few specs, it's made of gopher wood. Its dimensions, it was 300 by 50 by 30 cubits. What's a cubit? That is a cubit. Now there's different cubits. There's at least two different cubits. This Noah's cubit is 20.4 inches. So when you math that out, it's 510 feet long by 85 feet wide and 51 feet tall. So, but 510 feet, what is that? Well, that's over a football field and a half long. It's long. This thing is huge. Like if you actually go to, well, I got some photos in here too of it, but if you actually go to the Ark Encounter and you stand, it's unreal. If you go inside, I mean, the job they did on that is just, it's outstanding. Decks-wise, it had a lower, second, and a third deck. Openings, there was a door on the side, and there was a deck side window. And timing, about 1,700 years after the fall, or about 4,370 years ago. So, yeah, it was a little while ago. Christians today, what do they think about Noah, his ark, and the flood? So AIG, if you see that in here, it's Answers in Genesis. So they asked 20 to 29-year-olds who were church kids, Noah's Ark, real or legend? Real, 51%. Legend, 49%. Yeah. So, again, if you don't take Genesis 1 to 3, you don't interpret it literally, you don't take it as an account, right, a historical narrative. Well, what are you going to do with the rest of Scripture? What are you going to do when you start talking about, like, the plagues in the Exodus? I mean, that's pretty outlandish, Water, blood, frogs everywhere, locusts eating everything. I mean, firstborn's dead. If you can't accept this, you can't go back to Genesis 1 and believe that God actually spoke creation into being, you're going to have a hard time, I believe, rightly interpreting the Bible. So, let's go back. So to break that down, about 40% believe the Bible has errors, and over 50%, so these are some of the questions that preceded this particular one. About 40% believe the Bible has errors, right? So much for the inerrancy of the word. And about 50% had issues with wrong about age. It was about 34%. And Genesis was disproved. About 11% thought that. And never flooded during Noah's time. About 7% thought that. So, there's the argument of, was it a local flood? Was it a global flood? But some of them apparently maybe didn't even believe there was a flood. So 50-50. Now, Christian, how do you define that? Who calls themselves a Christian? And who was this question asked to? Fair enough. That's maybe, could merit a deeper dive. But this is what they reported. And it's basically 50-50. And that's not particularly encouraging. So is the Bible the inerrant word of God, or isn't it? If you think it isn't, why is that when the Bible with its amazing historicity is unambiguous about its inerrancy? So the Bible to itself is very clear. This is God's word. There should be no question. But clearly many still do. So Ark Encounter. So this is kind of trying to understand like the scale of what happened, right? We're kind of like flood. Okay. Ship. Cool. But this thing's massive. So Noah's Ark, Genesis 6. So again, the most amazing shipbuild of all time. There is a video here. Maybe write the link down. It's answers in genesis.org/Noah's-Ark /. So yeah, that just kind of will, it just shows the immensity of it. And so here's the door on the side where you enter. I'm going to go with bow and stern, right? Front, rear. And this is the roof. So there was just I think it was called a 1 cubit, basically. It was a very small window, very low roof. And here you can see, this is a picture of the bow. This is the stern. And there's all the little people. So if you go inside of that, it is unreal. And actually show some of the process of how they fed the animal, how they housed the animals, fed the animals, and how they actually managed waste, right? How they dealt with all of it. Actually, if you go inside, it's not just an exoskeleton, right? It's actually inside, and they've improved it over time. It's kind of like a little fake zoo in a sense. You can go in there, and it's amazing the detail that's in there. It is worth the trip, and go to the Creation Museum as well. Super cool. So, all aboard. Limited vacancy? Nope. Juveniles would save space over full-grown adult kinds, right? So people are like, how do you get all these animals on board? It's like, well, you don't have to take the mommies and the daddies, right? You can take the little ones. And 2x2 of every kind. So kinds, not species. So kinds, aka sorts, is also mentioned in the Bible. But it's 2x2, right? And again, these are kinds, not species. Kinds versus species. So baramin, though, on that is actually translated created kind. So that's Hebrew. But kind itself is God terminology for different groups of animals. It's easily understood. Like as they kind of go through the animal kingdom and you say, oh, that's kind of dog-ish. That's cat-ish. That's fish. It's kind of simple. But when you actually take it to the next level and you do the species route, man terminology to explain the animal kingdom can often be confusing, right? Or like, which species is that? And they've tried to explain transitions as well, but that's why they need that. So they have to keep building up, propping up the theory of evolution. And it's confusing. It is I think to put it simply, it's a web of lies as far as I'm concerned. So how did they know where to go and when? Well, in Genesis 6:19-20 and 7:1, God instructed Noah, and I believe just like today, animals migrate. Clearly, the animals could have been directed to go into the ark. I don't see why that's such a stretch. But, I wanted to read these verses here. So, Genesis 6:19-20. And of every living thing of all flesh, you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Of the birds, back then they didn't have an issue identifying what a man and woman is. It's nice. How convenient. of the birds according to their kinds, and of the animals according to their kinds, and of every creeping thing on the ground according to its kind. 2 of every sort or kind shall come into you to keep them alive. Also, look at this. Forward thinking, planning. Also take with you every sort of food that is eaten and store it up. It shall serve as food for you and for them. Noah did this. He did all that God commanded him. So I think in all this, what I find amazing is that Noah is like, yep, okay, I'm on it. Gonna get it done. Yep. Okay, you do this, you do that. He just built the ark. I mean, as the account reads, Noah was very obedient and trusting and faithful. So Genesis 7:1, then the Lord said to Noah, go into the ark, you and all your household, for I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. So it was Noah, his wife, 3 sons, 3 wives, 8 on the ark. And so God instructed them to go and do, and that's how, in terms of like the timing of it, how it happened. So one thing to note here, so when we talked about kinds, we keep mentioning that. Did I mention kinds? But so here, you can see all these variations, right? So if you bring a dog on board, well, or from a wolf, dog, type animal, well, they can have a lot of variations within that kind. And then the same with chickens, same with horses or zorses or zonkies. I guess there's a few. There's actually a liger. Maybe you've heard of that. Actually, I think it's the largest cat. It's like 1,000-pound cat. Like, I'm not shaking hands with that one. That is crazy. But these are out there, like, so you can look it up, and it sounds funny, but it's true. And what about dinosaurs? Yep, same thing. So there you can see there's a Triceratops top left here, and then again variation right within the kind. So that's why you didn't have to go out and find every single one and actually cover it all. So it does apply to all the animals as well as dinosaurs. So going on to the flood, right? So we're loaded up the ark. Everybody's on board. Only 8 people on that, football field and a half ship, and a lot of animals. And the whole earth was covered. God's word left no room for dissension. In other words, it wasn't only Mesopotamia or the Black Sea region. It's very clear that the whole earth was covered. So this is where, when I was doing a spell check, there's nothing local that when I put there's nothing local about the flood, the spell check correction was trying to make it logical. There's nothing logical about the flood. I'm like, you got to be kidding me. I'm getting spell checked, and it's telling me the flood's illogical. like, man, I can't even leave spell check alone. And then, so that was about the great flood. But so all of mankind, all the animals, if it wasn't a global flood, right? So if all the earth wasn't covered and it was local, right? Let's say it was just a valley or a low-lying area, why build the ark? You don't need a ship. Climb the mountain, cross a hill, get out of danger. But it's not what's written, and that's not what happened, right? So in Genesis, we'll read this because this is very core, right, to what we're doing in terms of flood fossils and dinosaurs. Genesis 7:17-24. The flood continued 40 days on the earth. The waters increased and bore up the ark, and it rose high above the earth. The waters prevailed and increased greatly on the earth, and the ark floated on the face of the waters. And the waters prevailed so mightily on the earth that all the high mountains under the whole heaven were covered. Doesn't sound local to me. The waters prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep, right? And all flesh died that moved on the earth, birds, livestock, beasts, all swarming creatures that swarm on the earth, and all mankind. Everything on the dry land in whose nostrils was the breath of life died. He blotted out every living thing that was on the face of the ground, man and animals and creeping things and birds of the heavens. They were blotted out from the earth. Only Noah was left, and those who were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed on the earth 150 days. So, and then, so the water that came from below. And so from the deep, and then it came from the heavens as well, right? So it came from both ends. And so it was an article a while ago, August 1st, 81. And so the Institute for Creation Research, that's ICR, if you see ICR as an acronym, that's what it is. So there were pre-flood springs of the oceans they'd be like vents on the ocean floors. And so the discovery of these deep ocean springs in this article called Springs of the Ocean is said to be the most significant oceanographic find since the discovery of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. So that there are deep springs within the ocean that would have sprung up, and they would have provided some of the water to cover the earth as well as the water canopy that let loose. And this continued for 40 days. And so obviously I think we all understand, right? It was the fall. God said, all of what man does is they are corrupt. They're wicked. I'm tired of you. But Noah was found to be righteous, and that's why he was spared. But that's what gets us to where we are here in terms of flooding the earth. So how deep is the ocean? Like today, just as an example. So maybe you've heard of the Mariana Trench. So in Wikipedia, there are some crazy specs in there. At the bottom of the trench, the water, again, this is the Mariana Trench. At the bottom of the trench, the water column above exerts a pressure of 1,086 bar, which is about 15,750, but call it 16,000 PSI. I mean, that's deep. More than 1,071 times the standard atmospheric pressure at sea level. So what we're pretty much experiencing right now. Barometric pressure. At this pressure, the density of water increased by around 5%. The temperature at the bottom is 1 to 4 degrees Celsius, so just above freezing. I mean, that's deep, that's scary. And what's down there? I have no idea, and I don't think I'm going to find out. But maybe somebody else can go. Volunteers. But I mean, it's to think of what we see so often. That's what we see, what we understand. But there is so much out there. How vast the oceans are. So this oceanic trench is located in the western Pacific Ocean. It's about 200 kilometers and 24 miles east of the Mariana Islands. It is the deepest oceanic trench on Earth. So it's about 1,580 miles in length and 43 miles in width. At the southern end of a small slot-shaped valley in its floor known as the Challenger Deep. If Mount Everest were placed into the trench at this point, its peak would still be underwater by more than 2 kilometers. I mean, just to give the scale of that, that's unreal. That is, it's deep. So, this is a cross section of it. So if I just go up here, yeah. So this is just a photo showing basically off the coast of Japan and China. Maybe it's a little hard to see, but this is it right here, Mariana Trench, and that is the Challenger Deep there. And here's a cross section of it, and here's the actual trench itself. When you look over here, there's an island, and it's poking through the surface of the water. But what I find interesting is that this cross section, the mountains and valleys appear to be underwater, right? Just looking at the image of the ocean floor, right? You can see valleys, you can see mountains. And so it's just a rather interesting image. And I think it's an eye-opener, as to what's actually out there, what we do understand and how much we don't understand. So in terms of the ark, it's been floating, as far as, and when it came to rest on, people ask, where could the ark be found? Where could it be found? Well, it says, it's not on Mount Ararat. It's on the mountains of Ararat. So many people have claimed to have found it, right? That after all that time, it ran aground, right? It sent out the raven, sent out the dove. Dove comes back with olive branch. So you're at the point now where people want to know, because they think if they find it, it's like this holy grail, of creationism, right? There's a few things that people thought that if we found a living dinosaur, whatever we might find. But many have claimed it, none have proved it, right? They've tried to do soundings, they try to get into Turkey. Turkey says, no, we're going to shoot you, or whatever the case may be. They try to go access it, they want to research it, and there's satellite images. That looks like an ark from here. But really, there is nothing definitive. And there's a lot of reasons why the ark probably isn't still around. So wood decays, probably nothing left. Maybe they repurposed the ark, right? I mean, there's all that wood there. It's like, well, that's a lot of good timber. Let's build some things, fire, whatever the case may be. And then, so in the end, probably not. Would be cool to find it. But it seems that so far, that seems to not be the case. But really, if we did find it, would that matter? Would there still be people saying, yeah, but? Of course there would be. There were miracles done, and people disregarded those back in Jesus' time. And then now, same thing. If they found the ark, I think if they actually found a dinosaur even today, which there are accounts of people saying, well, what they've seen, and it sounds dinosaur-like, but in the end, there's always going to be people who are going to say, yeah, but. And so that's why you still have to know what you need to know. So just to, again, maybe give some little timing around this. So based on major events such as the Exodus and Solomon's Temple and genealogies, so Abraham and Shem, the Great Flood occurred in around 2304 BC, just to kind of give a little time frame there. But so now the ark is landed. God makes his promise with the people. He says, I'm going to make a covenant with you to never destroy the earth with water. So taking back the rainbow, Genesis 9. So it's God's covenant. It's not a homosexual banner. It's not a flag. The rainbow is by God for creation, right? To give us peace, that he will never destroy us again like that. And that is critical to be reminded of and to know. I'm offended when I see it, to tell you the truth. When I see it, I don't, there are certain stores I don't go to. If you're going to paint it on your parking lot, I'm not showing up. I'm a hard pass, and you can simply just not do it, but you chose to do it. And so I'm not going to support you in that. But everybody has their own convictions, I suppose. But when it comes to me and what I see, it's, I believe, we should never have given ground to this, I call them the alphabet soup group, who have no business claiming the rainbow, right? It's blasphemy. This is God's promise to us. And they usurped it. Not only did they usurp it, put it on, they tried to anyways, they're trying to hijack things, right? Why do you always want to hijack Christian things? What's your deal? But, so they fly this flag, right? And then they actually put it on book covers, right? Obscene book covers. And they're in schools. This is something that I've been involved with as well. But the book cover itself has a rainbow on it. And that's going to attract the child if it's on the shelf in a school library. And be like, hey, that looks colorful, looks fun to me. And they open it, and they go to a page with sketches on it that all of a sudden has got like sketches of naked men and women and how your parts work. It's like, are you kidding me right now? And you're kidding yourself if you don't know or want to know or believe that these books are in schools right now in Windsor, Essex County. Right? So that just shows like it is a sinister thing that is being done. And so we need to say that is not your rainbow. Of course, you're gonna catch some serious flack, but that's the case. It's like, it's not yours. That is a sign of God's covenant. So the flood was a one-in-time event. Never again will God flood the earth. It's a promise for all time. So the bow in the clouds, as it's referred to, is a reminder that God will never again cause the water to destroy all flesh. The Genesis commandment repeated. So, and then after, when they disembarked the ark, God said, "Be fruitful and multiply." That was commanded to all of mankind, and it was commanded to animals as well. That it was repeated as what was in Genesis was after this one-time event, was again commanded to all of creation. So the Genesis curse repeated, though, so that there be the dread of man on animals, that all is given to eat, right? So now we're actually able to eat meat. And also in there, and it's not shortly after that this part of Scripture where they're off the ark and these commandments are giving, that there is justification for the death penalty given, right? That within these post-flood verses, that if you shed blood, that your blood should be shed. And maybe that's unsettling, but if you ask me, that's quite the deterrent to somebody murdering somebody else. So in terms of fossilization now, so now we're off the ark. We're like, okay, let's be fruitful, multiply. But now what's actually remaining, right? You have all this sedimentation that's occurred, right? The waters have receded, and there are dead people and animals everywhere, but they've been buried under mud. So I don't believe they're on the surface. The fossil record shows that they've been buried. So what is a fossilization timescale? We'd be often led to believe, that's got to take, 10 to the 6, 10 to the 9 years, right? Millions and billions of years. But no, it's actually quite fast. So in this photo you can see here, it's in terms of replacing organic material with minerals, it's relatively fast and doesn't necessarily require, billions of years. On the left that's a Fedorosaurus. And then to its right, these are, well, it's a private moment. These are copulating frog hoppers. So that's called like stasis, that they haven't changed from then to now. These were frog hoppers back when that fossil occurred, and this is how they look now. But they were making babies, and they got caught. And yeah, it's pretty amazing. This is another, well, I'll jump to this one here. This is a polystrate fossil. This is a tree cutting through layers of sedimentation, right, of rock. It's like, how does the tree, grow through layers of all these geologic ages and eras, right? So how does it actually occur? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. And some of these trees are actually found upside down, roots up. So trees not growing upside down, right? So, and of course, if you read on it, there are papers written about trying to refute that these polystrate fossils, polystrate meaning cutting through basically many layers, that these are not what we say they are, that somehow this occurred gradually over time, but that doesn't make sense to me. And I have a little more example of that as we go. This here is a fish that actually has a pterosaur in its mouth. This is a predatory fish, so a pterosaur being a reptilian bird. So it's eating it. It's killed it. And it's fossilized. I mean, how do you do that gradually? Sounds to me like there was an attack made. Uh-oh, here comes the water. I'm buried, and now I'm a fossil, right? And so sometimes we want to dig so deep into it. And like I said, the theory of evolution has to be propped up. But to me, a more, I guess I would call it, just first glance reading of that is like, well, that happened pretty quick, both that and the frog hoppers. But so I think it's a very, it does say it's a very short process. But this was actually on the website called Live Science, not a creationism website, right? But they acknowledge this. Again, we have the same evidence. We're interpreting it very differently. I mean, 180 degrees apart differently. No God scenario. So fish eats pterosaur on Live Science. They said, quote, now scientists have uncovered 5 examples of the long-tailed pterosaur. Ooh, it's a long word here. Rhamphorhynchus. Sorry about your name. Apparently, within the jaws of the ancient armed predatory fish, Aspidorhynchus. The fossil in question, unearthed in Bavaria and southern Germany, are about 120 million years old, they would claim, right? Of course. But in the end, I mean, it's an amazing thing to be captured. And there's not just one or a few of these, there's multiple of these. And then dating methods and circular reasoning. So when they say 120 million years, dating methods and circular reasoning is that to be aware that evolutionists use rock to date fossils and vice versa, right? How old is that rock? Well, that's how old the fossil is. How old is the fossil? That's how old the rock is. And so dating methods have not proven reliable due to reliance on assuming the period of the sample prior to testing. So if you don't give them the foreknowledge of what you think the year might be, and they've done this where they send it out to multiple labs, There's a lot of scatter in that data. Like it's not, oh, okay, so we're saying 30 to 35,000 years, or we're saying 1 million to 1,000,001. Okay, fine. No, it's like old, young. There are assumptions being made in the carbon-14 dating method about uniformity versus non-uniformity, about the concentration of carbon in the atmosphere and such. But bottom line is you gotta be really careful with what they're saying. And when they say something that they've measured something scientifically, it's like, well, did you follow the process properly? And are you being intellectually honest about what you've done? And the answer is a lot of times, no, they're not. So carbon-14 data. So requires assumptions, has its limitations, but it can be useful. So so creation.com, carbon-14 dating, to kind of, because we hear a lot about this, right? And you're like, what is carbon-14 dating? Carbon-14 dating explained in everyday terms. So this is an article. If you go on creation.com, you can look it up. We see then that far from being an embarrassment to the creationist who believes in a young Earth, the radiocarbon method of dating, when fully understood in accordance with modern atmospheric data, right? So there's been a change in the amount of carbon in the atmosphere, so it's not uniform. Gives powerful support to his position. So to the author is referring to. But you can see here, right? The flood and this red bar here that I put here just to show the change in these the data basically, and the distribution of the title of this is distribution of radiocarbon dates, men and animals in Afro-Eurasia. So this is creation. Right, going back basically a little over 6,000 years here. So carbon-14 dating isn't our enemy. You just have to understand how it's being used. There are limitations to everything you do, and if you measure something, well, you better know your measurement method and whether or not you're doing it correctly. So every measurement method requires due diligence to ensure an accurate or as accurate as possible. There's error in every measurement, right? The climate crisis crowd tells you 1.5 degrees Celsius over time. It's like, I take a lot of temperature measurements over the years. How you're measuring, where you're measuring, what type of instrumentation you're using. Is it calibrated? Is it not? I mean, it's not so easy to just nail that type of data down all the time. It can be done, of course, but it does take a lot of due diligence. So every measurement method requires due diligence to ensure an accurate or as accurate as possible measurement. So you have to calibrate. So if I want to measure something in a lab, I have a master gauge, and it says, this is 90 millimeters. Okay, now I'm going to zero my gauge, plug gauge, I'm going to take it, I'm going to put it into a cylinder bore, and I'm going to measure it, and now I know how far off I am from that 90 millimeters, which has to be in a temperature humidity controlled environment, ideally, right? So because metal will expand and contract based on those conditions. But when you put it in, boop, calibrate, now I can go measure my cylinder bore, right? But if you don't do that, then, well, maybe you got some air in there. You'll have air in there anyways. But then you have to do is it a true zero? Right? So you have to zero out, or is it a reference value? But or like if you're measuring weight, right? You have to, if you're like, well, I want to measure how much flour I want to put in. Well, you can tear it, you can zero it with the container, set it to 0. It accounts for the weight of the actual container, and then you add your flour, and now you know how much flour you have in there. But if you zeroed it instead of teared it, now you've got error in your measurement, because now you're going to be low on flour because you've not accounted for the weight of the container itself. So long story short, the whole point being, measurements can be done wrong. There are ways to do it, and if carbon-14 data is presented, and it's presented in such a way, or the test is done in such a way that it's not being right according to how that data was supposed to be acquired, you've got a problem. So when it comes to carbon-14, where it comes from, I read this, by no means an expert, but I'm going to read it for you so you guys can just kind of be presented with the information. Cosmic rays cause N14, so nitrogen-14, to C14, carbon-14 conversion, so which is processed by living organisms and cycles through their cells. When the organism dies, the C14 begins to radioactively decay back to N14, right? So carbon-14, let's go back to nitrogen-14. There's a carbon-14 to carbon-12 ratio, is it's non-uniform, but it's assumed uniform by evolutionists, right? So the assumptions made when you're doing a test or you're taking a measurement matter. And so the antediluvian means pre-flood, water canopy, and greater magnetic field would provide greater protection from cosmic rays and would have made the carbon-14 concentration small to perhaps effectively non-existent, resulting in artificially old dates from the carbon-14 radioactive decay dating method than if the non-uniform nature of the carbon-14 concentration was accounted for. So if they have these fossils and they're not accounting for the fact of how old the fossils are, what the carbon situation was back then to now, then they're going to get an erroneous result. And that's what you got to watch out for. So in short, carbon concentrations have not been constant and must be accounted for in using the C14 radiocarbon dating method, which when done indicates a young Earth, not an old Earth. So something to know. So fossil data per, again, AIG, answers in Genesis. Why don't we find human and dinosaur fossils together? So some interesting stats. About 95% of all fossils are shallow marine organisms, such as corals and shellfish. About 95% of the remaining 5% are algae and plants. About 95% of the remaining 0.25% are invertebrates, including insects. The remaining 0.0125% are vertebrates, mostly fish. 95% of land vertebrates consist of less than one bone, and 95% of mammal fossils are from the Ice Age after the flood. The number of dinosaur fossils is actually relatively small compared to other types of creatures. Since the flood was a marine catastrophe, we would expect marine fossils to be dominant in the fossil record, and that is the case. So things do align, but they're just not said out loud, because they're a little inconvenient for the theory of evolution. This is interesting here. This is maybe it's a little preview because I find this one interesting. I think it's one of my top 7, but intriguing marine fossils. So AMNH is the American Museum for Natural History. They share the evidence. Here's the evidence. But what's their interpretation, right? A little different maybe. Trilobite localities is the actual article. And I quote, "Their fossilized remains are found in the rugged mountains of Western Canada, the rolling plains of Eastern Europe, the scorching deserts of Northern Africa, and the verdant hills of Southern China." Well, trilobites are everywhere, apparently. Indeed, trilobites can be discovered on every continent on Earth where Paleozoic outcroppings exist. So how do you get marine life on a mountain? I think the water's got to go there first, right? And so what you see here, one account was given where this creationist, he was walking along and he was following the tracks, and he's like, well, these are trilobite tracks. I'm going to follow the trilobite tracks. And he kept following, where'd the trilobite go? And eventually he finds, hey, it's a dead trilobite. There's the fossil. So that's what these are the tracks here. This says tracks. These are the tracks here. Maybe it's a little hard to see with the cursor. These are trilobites, fossils. And then this is showing how the trilobite was running for its life and is trying to get away from the flood, the mud, and doesn't want to be buried. But then eventually, trilobite succumbs to exhaustion, dies, is fossilized, but it's not found necessarily in the depths. Now it's found a little higher than maybe you would expect it. So trilobites, being found in the rugged mountains of Western Canada, I find that kind of interesting, right? Explain that one to me. So, also peculiar fossilization. So ICR, what are polystrate fossils? We talked about this a little already. We first note that fossil-bearing sedimentary rock consists, with few exceptions, of sediments which accumulated in a watery environment and are now hardened into sedimentary rock. It has now been well demonstrated that rapidly moving sediment-laden fluids can result in abundance of lamination and/or layers. They can be formed in lab experiments, by hurricanes, and were even formed by catastrophic mud flows associated with the eruption of Mount St. Helens. That's not that old, right? A better interpretation of past deposits would stem from acceptance of rapid, intense geologic processes such as Noah's flood. So polystrate fossils, though, we showed before, they're cutting through these layers of sedimentation. And so if you have a catastrophic flow, right, and when Mount St. Helens let loose, it just blew over all the trees, right? The bark came off the trees, and the trees all landed in the lake down below. So kind of an interesting little development there. As far as so again, going along with this catastrophic process, the Grand Canyon, it's an inside look at the Earth's crust with rocks crying out, I would say evidence, right? That the Grand Canyon itself, I don't know if anybody's been there, it's amazing. But it has folded, what appears to be folded rock, right? I remember seeing it, I'm like, that is really strange looking, and you can see the rock is folded. Like, how do you fold a rock? You can't do that after the fact. So gradualism would not allow for smoothing, curving rock layers. However, it makes sense for a worldview that includes the Great Flood. Evolutionist geologic column. So this is just showing the Grand Canyon, I believe, and it's just showing how the water cut. But over here, you can see a fold. And then here, we've looked at this before. It's the geologic column, and there's dead things in there. So, but that's an artist rendering, right? We gotta remember this. Like, it's like, tell somebody, say, and put it back on them. If they come up with it, great for them. But show me one example of where you find the geologic column as it's written in your science textbook. Show me. Prove it to me. Well, it's out there. Prove it. Show me. So a lot of times they're like, it's a fact. And it's like, well, not good enough, right? I need you to produce the data, right? And God we trust, all others bring data. So science books aren't always scientific. As mentioned previously, regarding grant money, it doesn't come without conditions a lot of times. That happens in the church. I believe it happens in educational institutions. I believe it's happening on our school board right now. But the movie recommendation that I mentioned was Expelled. It's called Expelled, No Intelligence Allowed. It was in 2008 by Ben Stein. It's a really good movie. Of course, they try to undermine it. And so on and so forth. But if you watch it, it's like, these are interviews. Like this guy's telling you his story. He's like, yeah, I was fired because I mentioned something that was even just intelligent design, had seemed like creationism. And they're like, okay, get out. It's like, wow, you're gonna lose your job for that? It's like, I thought we were supposed to be scientific. Like, why are people afraid of information, right? They're not just kicking it around or like, I think you're nuts, whatever. Like, that's what they're saying. But why are they afraid? Right? It shouldn't be a scary thing to entertain data. It's just data. It's amoral. It's evidence. But when you present it a certain way, it really shakes them to the core, is what it is, right? They are scared of the truth. That's my take on it. So, Mount St. Helens, Mount St. Helens eruption in the Little Grand Canyon. Eruption was May 18th, 1980. Steam explosion equivalent to 400 million tons of TNT. That's just one little mountain. I mean, not little mountain, but when you look at the entire Earth, right? That's Mount St. Helens, 400 million tons of TNT, 33,000 Hiroshima atomic bombs. Like, I can't even wrap my head around that. Caused summit losses of over 0.5 cubic miles and 1,300 feet of elevation and leveled forest, resulting in a log mat on Spirit Lake, which is a lake down below, with upright floating logs, right? So you can see here's Mount St. Helens pre-explosion, Mount St. Helens post, and look at that. It's like it's just gone. It lost its peak and part of its side. And then here you see Spirit Lake, and these are all the floating trees. When they get waterlogged and they sink to the bottom, they're standing up, right? So if this is a flood and they're standing up and now sedimentation follows, that's how you would get that. To me, that's how I would understand a polystrate fossil to occur. This is modern evidence. So you can look at modern evidence and say, how does that align with what else we see, in the fossil record? I mean, to me, it seems like a reasonable explanation. So now who's unscientific? There are modern examples of catastrophic water flow causing rapid erosion and ending in rapid sedimentation. The evidence is the same, but the interpretation is 180 degrees apart. God versus no God scenario, Bible fact or fiction, religion or science, Can it not be both? Can I not have a faith and be scientific as well? People try to tell you no, but that's, well, going back to mom, that's a lie from the pit of hell. And so, but the mud flow, March 19th, so in the time that followed, there was a mud flow. So March 19th, 1982, rapid canyon formation resulted from the mud sliding down the North Fork of the Toutle River. So this is a different example. Cutting the Little Grand Canyon via catastrophic drainage, yielding similar features as found in the Grand Canyon. Right. So if you were to look up the Toutle River and this Little Grand Canyon, the Grand Canyon, if you see it, it has sheer faces. Right. If you look at a river that's gradually eroded over time, it's got sloped sides. Right, because it's eroding. But if you sent a torrent of water, right, through land area, it's going to cut, and it's going to cut sheer sides like what you see with the Grand Canyon. So when people say, well, hey, look, Grand Canyon, geologic column, kind of, and yeah, millions of years. It's like, really? Well, why is it such a vertical wall? You're not making sense to me right now. If you're saying that this was millions of years of erosion, why is it so upright? And then again, you don't have to answer it for them. Let them sort of wrestle with that one. It's like, you don't have to give me I'd say this to them. You don't have to give me the answer now. You can come back to me in a day or a week or whatever, whenever, up to you, but answer the question. Because they will try to move on to something else. I guarantee you. They will try to run away from those facts and those evidence, and they'll try to move on to something. Well, I don't know. Let's talk about stars and planets or something. It's like, no. Answer my question. And again, it doesn't have to be now. You can give them a little bit of grace in that, but challenge them. So here's another one that I find quite interesting. A few years back, T-Rex fossil with pliable tissue and Live Science, that website I mentioned, reaches for an explanation. So the title is Controversial T-Rex Soft Tissue Find Finally Explained on November 26, 2013. But in the body, if you read down through the article, it says the problem is for 300 years, we thought, well, the organics are all gone, so why should we look for something that's not going to be there? And nobody looks, she said. So she's kind of just speaking her mind right there. I don't think maybe she doesn't realize what she's saying. This, Schweitzer lady. But Schweitzer thinks she has the answer. So the actual, right, the lady, the scientist doing the research says, I think I have the answer, but the title says, finally explained. I think I see, there's some contradicting remarks being made here. Are you confident in what you found or are you not? Can't have it both ways. They try to use iron to kind of explain that the bones of these various specimens, how it was, and it's really a tortured explanation, trying to use iron to explain how that preserved in a formaldehyde kind of way these soft tissues. So the bones of these various specimens are articulated, not scattered, suggesting they were buried quickly. Right? So they actually have the T-Rex and there's soft tissue in there, and that's what these photos are of here. So for me, there's not just one or two. There's 30 specimens as of this 2019 article on creation.com. It was updated. That was the last year of the update. That includes, it states, quote, it is not just dinosaur soft tissue either, but the presence of detectable proteins such as collagen, hemoglobin, osteocalcin, actin, and tubulin that they must account for. These are complex molecules that continually tend to break down to simpler ones, right? They decay. And the suggestion that blood vessels remaining recognizable for 2 years somehow demonstrates that these could last 35 million times as long, requiring a phenomenal cognitive leap. So they did a little lab experiment where they're like, well, we're going to put this in some, it was some bodily fluid, and over 2 years, it was still considered recognizable. It's like, well, it's recognizable. And that's 2 years. And that's in a lab environment. So there are very good scientific reasons behind Schweitzer's early 2010 comment on videotape. When you think about, quote, this is her, right? This is the lady who found these. commenting, quote, when you think about it, the laws of chemistry and biology, this is before, mind you, right? This is before it really started like developing and the story's growing and it's maybe gaining prominence and visibility. This is one of her earliest comments, I think. So she said, quote, when you think about it, the laws of chemistry and biology and everything else that we know say that it should be gone. It should be degraded completely. Yeah, that's right. But it's not. But it's not. And they're like, wow, let's come up with something else. So the excuses continue up to 2019 about chemical reaction. They called it toasting in some way. I don't know. To desperately try and explain how this soft tissue survived 68 million years. I mean, don't tell me evolution doesn't require faith. So living fossils, no joke. That is how they refer to these types of finds. Evolutionists refer to certain animals thought to be long ago extinct as living fossils, essentially disjointed words to avoid admitting they made a mistake. The coelacanth was supposed to be extinct millions of years ago until photographed with a diver and caught by fishermen. So the coelacanth is supposed to be millions of years gone. And they're like, oh, well, look at that. We got a diver swimming with the coelacanth. There's the fossil, right? Millions of years old, of course. But, oops, there's a diver with the coelacanth as it appeared in the fossil record. Oh, and there's some that they caught they're going to have for dinner later, I suppose. So that's pretty interesting. And then just how the spin they put on it. It's like, hey, you were wrong. It's okay to be wrong. I don't know if I mentioned this here before, but I mean, at work, they actually have a reward now for failing fast because, you get it's not the answer you're looking for, but it is an answer, right? And so I would say, like, sometimes when you test things, you break them, and that's how you know what its limits are, right? So you fail fast. It's okay. You failed. Yes, you spent some time, money, energy on it, right? But now you know that you need to change course. And so instead of admitting the error, they just, again, continue to prop up the theory of evolution. And it's sad and it's actually disgusting. So the way I put it here was living fossils say, how about we screwed up on this whole millions of years thing and don't know nearly as much as we thought we do, right? So there's a lot of arrogant ignorance, haughtiness, I think would be maybe a biblical word for it, of what they think they know and what they really know. What I found over the years is that if, as in engineering or whatever job you're in, as you learn more about your career, vocation, craft, the more I found, the more I learn I don't know. It's actually kind of mind-blowing. And I think it's a humbling experience. You're like, there is so much more to know than I actually know right now, even though I've been doing this for well over 20 years. There's just always more to it. It's never ending. You're never going to outlearn God, but you have to admit your mistakes in order to actually grow. And unfortunately, evolutionists have stunted growth because they will not admit their errors. So, terrible lizards in the Bible, great beasts. Behemoth in Job 40, 15 and 24, colossal herbivore. It's a grass eater. It says in the Bible that ate grass like an ox and its tail like a cedar tree. So sometimes you'll hear, that's a hippopotamus. No, it's not. Hippopotamus does not have a tail like a cedar tree, right? It's only good for swatting flies at best. And so and that's, I think, in the NIV, when I would look into some of the notes on it, I'd be like, they're like hippo. I'm like, that's not a hippo. And then they may say it's a crocodile. Well, in this case, not a crocodile. We'll get onto that with a Leviathan. So these are the greatest beasts of all creation, Behemoth and Leviathan. So this is the land beast, the first one mentioned in Job, and this is in this part of Job. This is God putting Job in his place, right? Job was wanting to complain, and God's like, "This is who I am, right? These are my pets. You can't possibly control these animals. You have no chance. If anything, you're going to run the other direction. But to me, They're part of my creation, and I control them. So it was that's, really, but the amount of text that's devoted to them too, though, right? There's a lot written. It's very specific. So people are like, well, these are mythical monsters. It's like, it's not what I'm reading. I'm reading very specific descriptions of what these were. And actually, this is where it gets into, are they still alive today? There's an animal called the Mokelemembe. It means river blocker. And there's continually these reports of this animal being found at dusk, feeding on plants, that it kind of makes its way across the river, kind of stands up and eats fruit. That's what these accounts are. They don't have a body. Nobody's found it. And that's why to say dinosaurs are alive today, you can't make that conclusion. It's not really a reasonable thing to do considering all the searching that's gone on. But there are accounts out there. So for me, I wouldn't say that they're still alive, but I also would say, keep looking. I think that'd be pretty cool. But so there was actually, it was this, these are like a Professor Mako was one of the guys that he had led expeditions into the Congo in search of the elusive creature, and believes to be a small dinosaur. But again, this is not something that I would say that is anything definitive to define it in that way. Now on to Leviathan. So this is perhaps a sea dragon. So it has an impenetrable snout, airtight armor, no hooks or harpoons could pierce. It's fire-breathing, and it's a fast meat eater. Right? So it's flashing breath, glistening wake, rows of teeth. But to God, these were pets. And it's interesting, like at creation.com, there was a March 23, 2011 article about sea monsters, more than a legend. Tales of unknown creatures make sense in a biblical framework of history. So it could be true, but this, it's worth reading. For example, one sighting of such a creature occurred in the North Atlantic during World War I with a sinking of the British steamer Iberian by the German U-boat U-28. Some seconds after the Iberian had been torpedoed and sunk, there was an underwater explosion, right? So apparently the Iberian's gone down. Now there's an explosion. The submarine commander and some of his officers reported the following, quote, "A little later, pieces of wreckage, and among them a gigantic sea animal, writhing and struggling wildly, were shot out of the water to a height of 60 to 100 feet. We did not have the time to take a photograph, for the animal sank out of sight after 10 or 15 seconds. It goes on to say it was about 60 feet long, was like a crocodile in shape, and had 4 limbs with powerful webbed feet and a long tail tapered to a point." So is that true? Can we believe it? I don't know. But the way the Leviathan's described, and I encourage you to read it if you haven't read it yet, there are so many details given, right, about the appearance of it, that you couldn't, that its armor, its scales, that you couldn't, the rows of teeth, and the fire breathing, right, the flashing breath, the glistening wake, all that. It's rather amazing. And I don't believe God's going to devote all of this text in his word and write it in such a way if it's not the truth, right? You're basically questioning what God wrote. But Job 7:11-12, "Therefore I will not restrain my mouth. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit. I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. Am I the sea, or a sea monster that you set a guard over me?" So this is Job saying he's going to complain. But it's interesting that what the comment here is that did this dinosaur, was he walk with Job? He's saying this idea of a guard, as in if they're guarding against the sea monster, like guys are watching for this. So again, all I can say is read it. There's a lot out there. But so we can't forget T-Rex. Full name, Tyrannosaurus rex. It was 42 feet, tip to tail, nose to tip of the tail, and then its head was 4.5 feet long, 4.5 foot head. And it was 13 feet at the hip. It was 4 to 6 tons. That's 8,000 to 12,000 pounds. And it was 11 to 25 miles an hour. So catch most humans. And one bite damage is said to remove 100 pounds of flesh in one bite. And that's T-Rex. That's not Leviathan. Like, oof, so I think God's in terms of Leviathan, he's making his point in the Bible of who he is, right? And that's just Leviathan. Like, that doesn't take, just think of the universe and the expanse of it. So this is one scary beast, but Leviathan is the greatest of all beasts, right? So I think this is just, again, it's fascinating to read this. And to me, it bolsters your faith. And if you go to creation.com, you go to ICR.org and these other websites and read what these creation scientists have written. And they're real about it. They're like, we used to think that maybe dinosaurs still live, but we're saying the evidence right now doesn't point to it at all. So they're trying to be real with what they're presenting, and there's a wealth of information out there. But one thing that we should note too here is that the T-Rex is a little known fact. T-Rex hates push-ups. You guys heard this one before? I had to. That's not happening. It's just not. Sorry. Yeah. But people are like, well, but at the same time, sometimes they'll say, what they call them vestigial organs, or like, what was that for? It's like, well, God designed the T-Rex to be the T-Rex. So T-Rex had short arms, right? But they say that the arms perhaps were used for rising from a sleeping position, right? T-Rex falls over, T-Rex got to get up. Or mating. So next topic. But we'll just say that, what's in the fossil record, what you see, they're complete organisms. They attempt to try and find the missing link, and this occurred somewhere, I think, in mid-1900s, but when they actually had the optics to look closer at the molars of these skulls, they saw that they were filing down the tips of the teeth, so it didn't appear to be so primate. And it's like they're trying to force. They had names to them, like one was like Lucy, and they would say, well, here's the missing link. But they're actually trying to fabricate the evidence, right? So evolutionists shouldn't do that, nor should we, and say that either as creationists and say that we've actually found dinosaurs today, or just run on with certain reports. It's tough, but because it would be so cool to see. I mean, it captures my imagination. So we're wrapping up. This is near the end, but I just want to close with this. So cryptids, there is cryptozoology, I would say. Search but don't obsess. There is an encyclopedia online, which I found it's interesting. But we did mention the coelacanth captured, right? They found that. That's a living fossil, right? That was the fish that we were looking at that was swimming with a diver and caught by fishermen. The colossal squid, giant squid, it's in the world's oceans. It's been captured. And there is evidence in sperm whales of the sperm whale having beaks of these colossal squids in its stomach and on its outside. So the squid has an ability, the colossal squid, for its claws to rotate. And so there's scars on the outside of sperm whales. These sperm whales are huge. They're absolutely monstrous animals. And here you have a squid going after this whale. So Kraken, you probably heard that one before. And there's Mokelemembe that I mentioned, Central Africa, Bigfoot Yeti. I'm not saying they're out there. I'm not saying they're not, though. I'm not going to say that. Thunderbird North America, there are people who have given evidence of massive birds, like people flying in an airplane. They look out and they see this bird next to them, and it's got a wingspan of what seems to be a small plane. So there are people who seem to be reputable who are giving these reports, but it's give me something better. I want to see a body. I want a photo. I want a video, and that's where, unfortunately, it does fall short. Loch Ness Monster, they've looked for that intensely, right? So they've done sonar soundings. They've cruised the loch. They haven't found anything. People say they found it, but they've seen it, but the fact of the matter is they haven't found anything. There's Okobogo, Lake Okanagan, Canada, Lake Champlain, North America. Then there's Mussy in Ontario, Canada, apparently. Megalodon, world's oceans, right? We hear about Megalodon. But in the end, so there's a lot of potential out there. I'm not saying they do exist. I'm not going to say they necessarily don't. But the post-flood atmosphere really does not seem to support these larger animals any longer, right? So they did die out and become extinct, and that seems to be the case. But again, concerning these possible sea monsters, so the world's oceans cover over 2/3 of our planet and average a depth of 10,000 feet. More than twice that of the Grand Canyon. At their deepest is about 7 miles. So there's plenty of room for these animals to exist and may not be extinct after all, but that's pretty much the end of it. So thank you very much. Hope you guys found it interesting. I know that was a longer one. Believe it or not, it could be a lot longer. There is so much out there. Like I was sitting as I'm preparing this presentation, I'm like, oh, I could keep going down that rabbit trail, that tangent. I mean, there was so much information out there, and I just encourage you to go find it on your own. So in closing, the next session is 4. It's how to engage and stand firm. So it's going to kind of coming back around to apologetics and what to do. The pre-reading is Acts 1:1-5, 1 Peter 3:8-22, 2 Timothy 4:1-5, and Proverbs 25:15.